It's labor, and then she stops. And just like all her other babies, about a week and a half ago, she started.
Welcome back to my channel. There are moments in life when everything changes, not with noise, not with chaos, but with silence. And for Christine, that moment didn't come in front of cameras or during some explosive argument. It came in an empty house. A house that once echoed with voices, tension, expectations, and unspoken pain, now completely still. And instead of rushing to fill that silence, she made a choice that shocked even herself. She decided to sit in it. No distractions. No pretending. No performing. Just being a mother. Just existing. And for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to feel what life was like without constantly carrying the emotional weight of an entire family system on her shoulders. Imagine that shift. A woman who spent years calculating every word, every reaction, every public moment, suddenly letting go. Not trying to impress anyone. Not trying to protect anyone's image. Just breathing. Just watching her kids grow without fear hovering over every interaction. And in that quiet, something powerful began to take shape. Because when you remove chaos, truth gets louder. Christine started seeing people differently. The world differently. She realized something that went against everything she had been conditioned to believe. People are not as judgmental as she had been told. In fact, they're more open, more curious, more willing to understand than she ever imagined. That realization alone was enough to shake the foundation of everything she had lived through. Because for years, fear had been the control mechanism. Fear of exposure. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing everything. But now, that fear was gone. And without it, she began to understand something even deeper, that her story, her truth, didn't need to be hidden anymore. That maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to hear it. And that's where everything started to shift. Because while Christine was sitting in that quiet space, rediscovering herself, something was building behind the scenes, something no one in that family saw coming. A transformation that would not only change her life, but completely rewrite the narrative everyone thought they understood. And the most shocking part? It didn't come from drama. It didn't come from revenge. It came from truth. Raw, unfiltered, undeniable truth. And once that truth was finally set free, there was no stopping what came next. Because while Christine was quietly rebuilding her life from the inside out, something extraordinary was happening on the outside, and it hit like a shockwave. The latest financial reports didn't just reveal success, they revealed dominance. Christine Brown didn't just release a book and hope for the best. She didn't rely on controversy or manufactured drama to sell copies. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She told the truth. And that truth connected in a way no one, especially not Cody and Robyn, were prepared for. Within just her second week, Christine didn't just land on the New York Times bestseller list. She claimed the #1 spot. Not in one category, but in two. Hardcover nonfiction and ebook. That kind of achievement isn't luck. It's not timing. It's impact. It's thousands upon thousands of people choosing her story over everything else competing for their attention. And while this was happening, where was the rest of the family? Struggling. Financial pressure mounting. Legal tensions rising. Relationships falling apart. The contrast couldn't be more brutal. On one side, a woman who walked away from everything, rising to the top. On the other, those who tried to maintain control, slowly losing it. But here's where the story gets even more layered, because this isn't just about success. It's about irony. Years ago, Robyn openly talked about her dreams. She wanted fame. She wanted to meet Oprah. She wanted to write a bestseller. She envisioned herself as someone important, someone influential, someone admired. But there was one major problem. She was dreaming without building. She was imagining outcomes without living the experiences that would give those outcomes meaning. Meanwhile, Christine wasn't dreaming about writing a book. She was surviving a life that would eventually become one. She was living through moments so raw, so complicated, so emotionally intense, that when she finally chose to speak, people couldn't look away. That's the difference. One person fantasized about success. The other unknowingly earned it through lived experience. And now, the results are undeniable. Christine didn't just outperform expectations, she shattered them. She proved that authenticity carries a weight that no amount of strategy or image control can replicate. And perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all? The very thing Robyn wanted so badly came naturally to Christine the moment she stopped trying to be anything other than herself. And this is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore, because what Christine just accomplished isn't just success, it's independence in its purest form. Yes, Robyn can say she was part of a bestseller before. That much is true. But let's not rewrite history here. That success was never hers alone. It was built on the combined voices of multiple women, each bringing something real, something raw, something lived. Christine's honesty, Janelle's grounded reality, Mary's painful transparency. Those stories carried weight because they were authentic. Robyn simply stood among them, contributing her perspective, yes, but never carrying the emotional backbone of the narrative. That book worked because it was a shared truth. But this time, there was no one else. No safety net. No collective storytelling to lean on. Just Christine. Her voice. Her experiences. Her truth. And that's exactly why it hit so differently. Because when someone stands alone and still reaches the top, you can't credit the system, you have to credit the person. And for someone like Christine, who spent decades being careful, controlled, and quietly compliant, this moment represents something much deeper than book sales. It represents a complete transformation. For years, she mastered the art of holding back. She learned how to speak without really saying anything. How to smile while hiding discomfort. How to protect a family image that was slowly breaking her from the inside. Every interview, every appearance, every public moment was filtered, calculated, safe. She became incredibly skilled at giving just enough to seem open, while keeping the real truth buried. And that kind of emotional discipline? It doesn't just disappear overnight. It becomes part of who you are. But something changed. Somewhere along the way, Christine stopped protecting the narrative and started telling her own. She let go of the fear that had controlled her voice for so long. And when that happened, everything shifted. Because the stories she's telling now, they're not polished. They're not comfortable. They're not designed to make anyone look good. They're real. The kind of real that makes people pause, that makes them uncomfortable, that makes them reflect on their own lives. She's talking about things that were never meant to be discussed publicly. Private dynamics, emotional struggles, relationship truths that most people would take to their grave. And yet, she's putting it all out there, not for attention, but for connection. That's why people are listening. That's why the book is selling. Because readers can feel the difference between someone performing a story and someone finally telling it. And right now, Christine isn't performing anything. She's just being honest. And in a world full of carefully curated images and controlled narratives, that kind of honesty is unstoppable. And when you really step back and look at the bigger picture, the numbers alone tell a story that words almost can't fully capture. Because making it onto the New York Times bestseller list isn't just about popularity, it's about impact. It's about real people in real numbers, making a conscious decision to invest their time, their money, and their attention into someone's truth. To even qualify for that list, a book typically needs to sell over 5,000 copies in a single week. Now on the surface, that might not sound impossible. But in reality, most books never come close. Thousands of authors spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, writing, publishing, promoting, all with the hope of maybe one day seeing their name on that list. And even with large platforms, media exposure, or celebrity backing, many still fall short. That's how competitive it is. That's how selective readers have become. So for Christine to not only meet that threshold, but completely dominate it, hitting number one in 2 major categories, isn't just impressive, it's rare. It's the kind of success that forces people to stop and pay attention, whether they want to or not. And what makes it even more powerful is how she got there. This wasn't driven by scandal headlines or manufactured controversy. This wasn't a marketing stunt or a strategic PR push designed to create hype. This was organic. This was readers connecting deeply enough with her story that they felt compelled to support it. Think about that for a second. In a time where people are carefully choosing where to spend every dollar, balancing bills, groceries, responsibilities, they chose Christine. They chose her voice over thousands of other options available to them. That decision doesn't come from curiosity alone, it comes from recognition. People saw themselves in her story. They felt something real. And that's something money can't buy or fake. But here's where the contrast becomes even sharper. When Robyn previously celebrated being part of a best-selling book, that success was largely fueled by the show's popularity. It gave audiences a behind-the-scenes look at a lifestyle that most people found fascinating or unfamiliar. It worked because it fed curiosity. But Christine's current success? That's not curiosity, it's connection. Readers aren't picking up her book to peek into a strange world. They're picking it up because they relate. Because they see pieces of their own struggles reflected in her experiences. Because they've felt trapped, unheard, controlled, or lost at some point in their lives. And Christine is giving a voice to those feelings in a way that feels honest and unfiltered. That's the difference between entertainment and impact. One grabs attention for a moment, the other stays with you long after the story ends. And right now, Christine isn't just getting attention, she's creating something lasting. Something meaningful. Something that proves that when truth is finally spoken without fear, people will always listen. But what makes this story even more fascinating, almost unsettling in its irony, is what Robyn herself once revealed about her dreams long before any of this played out the way it did. If you go back to the earlier days, back to the pages of Becoming Sister Wives, you'll find something incredibly telling. Robyn sat down at what she described as one of the lowest points in her life and created a vision for her future. And on the surface, it sounded ambitious, even inspiring. She talked about changing the world, about becoming a best-selling author, about meeting powerful figures like Oprah, about building a business, creating influence, and leaving a mark that people would remember. But when you really look at that list, when you strip away the surface-level excitement, something feels off. Because none of those dreams were rooted in internal growth. None of them focused on healing, on building meaningful relationships, or even on becoming a better version of herself. It was all external, all about recognition, all about status, all about being seen. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Because when your goals are built around how others perceive you rather than who you actually are, there's a disconnect that eventually catches up to you. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. What's even more revealing is that Robyn dreamed of becoming a best-selling author before she had ever truly developed a voice worth listening to. She imagined the outcome without going through the process. She wanted the title without living the story that gives that title meaning. Meanwhile, during that same time, Christine wasn't dreaming about writing anything. She was living through experiences that would eventually become powerful enough to fill pages on their own. She was navigating emotional complexity, raising children in an environment filled with unspoken rules, managing relationships that required constant compromise, and silently developing a perspective shaped by real struggle. She wasn't building a fantasy, she was building depth. And that depth is what readers connect to. It's what makes someone's words resonate beyond surface-level interest. Robyn's list read like a celebrity wish board, something you'd expect from someone watching success from a distance rather than earning it through lived experience. And perhaps the most telling part of all? The things missing from that list. There was no mention of being a present, grounded mother. No focus on emotional connection. No desire for inner peace or personal growth. Just visibility. Just achievement. Just recognition. And while there's nothing wrong with wanting success, the foundation behind that desire matters. Because if the why behind your goals is empty, even achieving them won't feel fulfilling. And that's where this story starts to shift from ambition to reality. Because years later, Robyn did achieve many of those things. The fame, the platform, the attention. But instead of fulfillment, what followed was something much more complicated. And when you compare that to Christine, who never chased those things, never built her life around them, it becomes painfully clear which path led to something real, and which one led to something that only looked good from the outside. And this is where the story takes a turn that most people didn't catch at the time, but now, looking back, it feels like a warning that was hiding in plain sight. Because in that same moment where Robyn was writing down all of her dreams, all of her ambitions, all the things she believed would finally make her feel complete, she also admitted something that completely contradicts everything on that list. She said, "Be careful what you wish for, because you might get it all, and then it may be something you don't want." Now pause on that for a second. Because that statement alone reveals more truth than all the dreams she listed combined. It shows awareness. It shows doubt. It shows that somewhere deep down, even she understood that chasing external success doesn't guarantee internal fulfillment. And yet, she chased it anyway. She went after every single thing on that list: fame, attention, financial comfort, influence, proximity to power, and by all visible standards, she achieved it. She got the platform. She became part of a best-selling book. She gained recognition. She secured her position within the family. She even got what she claimed to want most: Cody's full attention. On paper, it looks like she won. It looks like everything worked out exactly the way she planned. But reality tells a very different story. Because instead of satisfaction, what we saw over time was frustration. Instead of gratitude, there was constant tension. Instead of peace, there was defensiveness, emotional strain, and a growing disconnect between how things looked and how they actually felt. And that's the part people don't talk about enough. Because achieving your goals is supposed to feel like the end of the struggle. It's supposed to bring clarity, happiness, a sense of arrival. But when your goals are built on external validation, on how others see you, how much attention you receive, how much approval you can gain, it never really ends. There's always something missing. Always another level to reach. Always another opinion to manage. And that's exactly what we saw happening. Even after getting everything she once dreamed of, Robyn remained focused on what she wasn't getting. The admiration. The universal approval. The uncontested image she seemed to expect. Instead of appreciating what she had, she became increasingly aware of what people were saying, how they were reacting, how she was being perceived. And that constant awareness? It's exhausting. It's a cycle that never closes. Because when your identity is tied to perception, you're never fully in control of it. Meanwhile, Christine's journey was moving in the opposite direction. She wasn't gaining everything, she was losing it. The family structure. The shared identity. The system she had been part of for decades. But in losing all of that, she gained something Robyn never truly found: freedom from needing approval. Freedom from constantly managing how she was seen. Freedom to just exist as herself without calculating every move. And that difference? That's everything. Because one woman got everything she thought she wanted and still felt unsettled. The other lost everything she thought she needed and finally found peace. And this is exactly where Robyn's carefully crafted image begins to crack, because once you look closely at her own words and actions, a pattern starts to emerge that's impossible to ignore. Back in those earlier years, while everything still looked relatively stable on the surface, Robyn made admissions that didn't seem shocking at the time. But now they feel incredibly revealing. She openly talked about interacting with the show's producers in a very calculated way. Not from a place of honesty or openness, but from a place of control. She expressed concern about how she was being portrayed, even going as far as to guide how certain narratives should be handled so that viewers wouldn't turn against her. And on one level, you might understand that. Reality TV can be brutal. Editing can shape perception. But this wasn't just about fairness. This was about image management. It was about making sure that what people saw aligned with how she wanted to be seen, rather than who she actually was in those moments. And that's where things get complicated. Because while she was actively working behind the scenes to influence perception, she was also publicly expressing confusion, almost frustration, about why people viewed her as manipulative or strategic. Think about that contradiction. On one hand, she's acknowledging that she's carefully navigating situations, trying to shape outcomes, controlling how things are presented. On the other hand, she's questioning why viewers are picking up on that exact behavior. That disconnect isn't just ironic, it's telling. It's the kind of behavior that anyone who has dealt with a manipulative personality will instantly recognize. Create the situation, control the narrative, and then question why people are reacting to it. It's a cycle that feeds itself. And over time, it becomes harder and harder to separate what's real from what's being performed. But here's what makes it even more striking. Despite having everything she once claimed to want, security, attention, influence, Robyn remained deeply focused on criticism. She paid attention to polls, to rankings, to public opinion. She noticed where she stood compared to the other wives. And more often than not, she found herself at the bottom. That became a point of frustration for her, a point of confusion. Because in her mind, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was managing, protecting, navigating. But from the outside looking in, people were seeing something very different. They were seeing calculation where she saw intention. They were seeing control where she saw effort. And that gap between self-perception and public perception, it only continued to grow. Meanwhile, Christine was moving in a completely different direction. She wasn't trying to control how people saw her anymore. She wasn't trying to polish her image or smooth out the rough edges. In fact, she was doing the opposite. She was leaning into the uncomfortable truths, sharing the parts of her story that weren't flattering, that weren't easy, that didn't make her look perfect. And that's exactly why people connected with her. Because authenticity doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. And while Robyn was still trying to shape the narrative from the outside, Christine had finally stepped into her truth from the inside. And once that shift happens, there's no going back. But to really understand why Christine's success feels so powerful right now, you have to go back to what was actually driving her in the beginning, because it wasn't fame, it wasn't attention. And it definitely wasn't some carefully planned strategy to become a best-selling author. It was fear. Real, constant, suffocating fear. Before the cameras ever entered their lives, before the world even knew their names, Christine was living in a reality where every single day required caution. Every conversation, every interaction outside the home, every moment her children spent around others had to be managed. What could they say? What couldn't they say? Who could they trust? What would happen if someone found out the truth about their family structure? That kind of pressure doesn't just exist in the background, it becomes your entire way of thinking. And for Christine, it had been that way for years. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting her children, constantly teaching them to filter their words, to hide parts of their lives, to live in a version of reality that was only partially true. Imagine raising kids like that. Imagine watching them grow up with that kind of awareness, that kind of fear built into their everyday lives. That's not something you can ignore. That's not something you can pretend doesn't have consequences. And eventually, it reached a point where Christine couldn't justify it anymore. Not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted relief. She wanted her children to be able to live openly, to speak freely, to exist without constantly looking over their shoulders. That was her real motivation behind stepping into the public eye. It wasn't about becoming known, it was about becoming free. She wanted to show the world that her family wasn't what people assumed. That they weren't dangerous, they weren't abusive in the way extreme cases had been portrayed. She wanted to offer a different narrative, one that could reduce fear, reduce judgment, and maybe even protect other families living in similar situations. That's a completely different mindset from someone chasing fame. That's advocacy. That's sacrifice. Because stepping into the spotlight didn't come without risk. She knew people would judge. She knew there would be criticism, misunderstanding, even backlash. But she also knew that staying silent wasn't protecting her family anymore, it was trapping them. And through her involvement in advocacy work and media training, she learned how to navigate that space carefully. Not to manipulate, but to communicate. To share enough truth to educate without putting anyone in danger. That balance isn't easy. It requires awareness, emotional control, and a deep understanding of what's at stake. And Christine carried all of that. She didn't step into the public eye because she wanted to be seen, she stepped into it because she believed it might help others. And now, years later, when she finally tells her full story without holding back, that original intention is still there. That's why it resonates. That's why it feels real. Because it was never about building an image, it was about breaking a cycle. And this is where everything comes full circle, because when you strip away the fame, the drama, the headlines, and the narratives that were built over the years, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Every single woman in that system was a victim of it. Every one of them. Even the ones who appeared to win. Even the ones who seemed to come out on top. Because the structure itself was never designed for equality, for emotional safety, or for genuine partnership. It was built on imbalance. Built on competition. Built on the idea that multiple women would have to fight, silently or openly, for the attention, validation, and approval of one man who ultimately held all the power. And when you really think about that, it changes everything. Because suddenly, this isn't about who was right or wrong, who was liked more, or who ended up with what. It's about understanding the system they were all operating in. A system where a woman's value was often tied to how well she could meet expectations, how much she could endure, how little she demanded in return. A system where emotional needs were negotiated rather than fulfilled. Where attention was divided, affection was conditional, and stability was never guaranteed. Christine's willingness to speak openly about her experiences, especially the most intimate, uncomfortable parts, pulls back the curtain on what that system actually looked like behind closed doors. When she describes feeling emotionally disconnected, unseen, even disregarded in her own marriage, she's not just telling her story, she's exposing a pattern. A pattern that many women, even outside of that specific lifestyle, can recognize in their own relationships. Feeling like an afterthought. Feeling like their needs don't matter. Feeling like they're expected to give more than they receive. And perhaps one of the most painful realities she revealed was the comparison, the awareness that while she was struggling in silence, others in the same environment were receiving a different version of the same relationship. More attention, more care, more connection. That kind of dynamic doesn't just create imbalance, it creates insecurity, self-doubt, and emotional isolation. And yet, it's often normalized within systems like that. Women are conditioned to accept it, to compete quietly, to question themselves instead of questioning the structure. And that's where the real shift happens. Because the moment someone steps outside of that system and starts speaking about it honestly, the illusion begins to break. Christine didn't just walk away physically, she walked away mentally. She stopped accepting the rules that once defined her worth. She stopped measuring herself against others in a situation that was never designed to be fair. And in doing so, she created space, not just for herself, but for others watching her story unfold, to question their own realities. Meanwhile, those who remained in that system, even if they gained more control or more attention, are still operating within those same limitations. Still navigating the same expectations. Still dependent on the same source of validation. And that's the difference between escaping a system and simply rising within it. One leads to freedom. The other just changes your position inside the same cage. And this is where the story becomes almost unbelievably ironic, because if you look at where everything started and where everyone stands now, it's like watching two completely different paths lead to two completely opposite realities. Robyn set out with a clear vision. She wanted success, recognition, stability, influence. She wanted to be seen, admired, and validated. And in many ways, she got exactly that. She became part of a public platform that reached millions. She experienced financial security that most people spend their entire lives chasing. She secured the relationship she believed would complete her life. On the outside, it looks like she achieved everything she ever asked for. But the reality behind that image tells a different story. Because what she gained in status, she seems to have lost in peace. What she gained in control, she seems to have lost in connection. The life she built, while impressive from a distance, feels restricted up close. Careful, controlled, constantly managed. And that's the part no one talks about enough. Because sometimes, getting everything you want doesn't feel like winning. It feels like maintenance. Like something you have to constantly protect, constantly justify, constantly hold together. Meanwhile, Christine's journey looks like the complete opposite. She didn't set out to win anything. She didn't chase recognition. In fact, she walked away from the very things that most people would fight to keep: her marriage, her place in the family, the structure she had known for decades. And for a moment, It looked like loss. It looked like everything was falling apart. But in that collapse, something unexpected happened. She found herself. Not the version of herself shaped by expectations, or defined by a role, or limited by a system, but her real self. Her voice. Her truth. Her freedom. And from that place, she built something that no one could take from her. Not a position. Not a title. Not an image. Something real. Something earned. Her success today isn't just about a best-selling book. It's about what that success represents. It represents choosing truth over comfort. It represents walking away from something familiar, even when it's painful, because staying would mean losing yourself completely. It represents the power of finally speaking without fear and discovering that people are not only willing to listen, but ready to support you when you do. And maybe that's the biggest lesson in all of this. That real success isn't about what you gain, it's about what you're finally free from. Free from approval. Free from control. Free from pretending. Christine didn't just change her life, she changed the narrative. She proved that authenticity will always outlast strategy. That truth will always resonate louder than performance. And that sometimes, losing everything you thought you needed is exactly how you find everything you were missing. So now the real question is, what comes next? Because if this chapter was about breaking free, the next one might be about building something even bigger. And if this is what her truth looks like now, imagine what she's still holding back.